All right, everyone. Welcome so much. Thank you for being here. My name is Cinnamon Moffat. I'm the Associate Director for Marine Research here at Hatfield Marine Science Center. And I just want to thank everybody for being here at our seminar. For folks that are maybe new to this event, this is a hybrid event. So that means we have folks online and folks in the room. So for folks online, thanks for being here as well. Just for those folks that are online, your cameras, mics, and screen shares are disabled for today's event. But if you have any questions around technical issues, or if you have any questions for our speaker today, please use the chat box, and our volunteer Roseanne will help navigate us in that, getting those questions asked. So just go ahead and use that chat box, and we'll get those questions answered. For folks that are in the room that might be new to this event, because it's a hybrid event, it does mean that you need a mic to ask a question so folks online can hear. The way we do that is when we open up question and answer, just raise your hand and I'll bring you a mic. So we'll work through that. Also, just want to remind folks that there are 2 sign-up sheets outside. If you haven't signed up on your way in, please either sign up on the general sign-up sheet, or if you're a student taking this for credit, please sign up on the student sheet so I can send that to your professor, and he knows that you're in the room today. So before we get started, I have a couple of quick announcements, and I got to put my glasses on because I'm blind. So next week, we have our last Science on Tap of the year, and that for the actual calendar year. And that is going to be Steve Rumrell. He will be here on November 13th at 6 p.m. in this room, and he is going to be talking about shifting nearshore ocean conditions and the consequences for Oregon's marine species. So Steve is a wonderful speaker. I hope you come and join us for that event. Again, that's on November 13th at 6 p.m. I also want to promote next week's seminar speaker, and I feel like I shouldn't do it because he's actually in the room. But Bill Chadwick, who is going to introduce today's speaker, is going to be next week's seminar speaker. And he is a senior research associate with Simmers here at Hatfield, and we'll be talking about axial seamount waking up. So that'll be a dynamic talk, I am sure. But since Bill is in the room and he is the host for today's speaker, I'm actually going to turn this whole thing over to him so he can introduce our speaker.
Thanks everybody for coming, and everybody online. Right, so our speaker today is Marley Parker, who's a freelance science communicator. So as students and scientists, we get trained to do our science, but we don't really get much training about effectively communicating science. So even though that's arguably just as important, and because science can't realize its fullest value if it isn't communicated to the widest audience in a way that's understandable and impactful. So in my own career, I've tried to learn from and collaborate with science communication specialists whose work has impressed me. And after viewing some of Marley's content online, I invited her to join a research expedition I led to axial seamount this past June. And Marley did a great job of helping us communicate our science and producing professional content in a remarkably short amount of time. So I think we can all learn about communicating our science more effectively. And in that spirit, I invited Marley to come to HMSC to give a talk from her perspective and to maybe spark some new collaborations with the OSU and HMSC community. So hand it over to you.
Thank you, Bill. I am really excited to be here. Can everybody hear me okay? Does the volume sound pretty good? Cool. Yeah, I have been a fan and a follower of Hatfield for a couple of years now, even before I met Bill. So it's really awesome to be here in person and to share a little bit of my work with y'all today. I'm going to start off by just sharing a quick story about where I was and what I was doing 2 years ago. In August of 2022, I was working in the Caribbean, and this was actually my very first expedition on the legendary RV Atlantis. We sailed out of San Juan, Puerto Rico, and we were working with HOV Alvin. And I'm sure all of you are very familiar with Alvin, but this particular expedition was a really exciting time to be working with Alvin because the sub had just been certified to its new depth rating of 6,500 meters. So every single dive that we made during this expedition was record-breaking and history-making because we were sending Alvin deeper than it had ever gone before. So my job on board was documenting everything we were doing, documenting the Alvin team preparing the sub before a dive, showing operations on the back deck, showing sample processing in the labs. And then some of my favorite moments were documenting the scientists as they came up out of Alvin after having spent the day on the seafloor. This is Sabrina Douglas, who is a native of the Cayman Islands. And she made again, a historic dive as the very first Caymanian to dive in Alvin and to dive in the Cayman Trench. So we had a lot of really just spectacular, special moments like this throughout the expedition. Another thing that I really enjoy doing when I'm at sea, and especially on this expedition, is flying my drone. So being able to capture this really beautiful, compelling aerial footage of the sub getting deployed or recovered. Again, we were working in the Caribbean and had perfect weather the whole time, which never happens. So I was able to pull off multiple drone flights and again, just show this different perspective of our research. Another element of the expedition that I found really compelling, because again, this was my very first time working with the Alvin team, is the Alvin swimmers. And I loved just taking photos of these people who are highly trained and go through a certification process to be able to be in the water with this giant submersible and to play a really critical role in the sub's deployment and recovery. I just thought that this part of the operation was unlike anything I'd seen before in ROV operations. And I just thought these guys were really impressive in both their athletic ability and agility working with the sub in the water. So I started talking to the captain, Derek, about the Alvin swimmers, about that whole part of the operation. He asked me a little bit about my background and my experience working in the open ocean. I told him about scuba diving and free diving and my comfort level in the ocean. And he said, you know what, Marley, you ought to get in the water with the swimmers. You should do your thing, photograph Alvin from that perspective. So this is a little kind of behind the scenes clip of what it looked like when I went out with the Alvin swimmers to do a recovery sub.
500 meters, 2 points, port bow. 500 meters, 2 points, port bow.
All right, thank you.
Fun.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I basically just grabbed a GoPro and hopped in the water. And I was only actually in the water for about 5 or 6 minutes. All of this happens very, very quickly. So I did not have a lot of time to capture both video and photos of the swimmers doing their thing. But I was able to get this photo and a couple of other pretty good shots. And I am so glad that I did, because these images ended up going everywhere, all over social media, all over Woods Hole website, local media and national media, including CNN, picked up these images. And I mean, I had all these other images. I had drone footage. I had a bunch of other cool shots that I got throughout the expedition, but these are the ones that really literally made a splash, so to speak. So I wanted to share that because it's kind of a good example of the type of work I do and what my work looks like when I'm at sea working on a research vessel. But I also wanted to share that with you all simply because it's a good story. And that is, in a nutshell, what my work is about, is helping scientists tell really compelling stories about their research. So I'm going to give a few more examples and tell a few more stories about how and why I do that. But before I do that, I wanted to tell y'all a little bit more about my background. So I have been specializing in documenting research expeditions for the past 7 years. And when people ask what I do, if I'm at a cocktail party or something and somebody asks what I do, I have to kind of step back and explain it. And the most concise way that I have found to describe my work is this. Say I'm a professional photographer, videographer, and science writer, and I specialize in documenting oceanographic research expeditions. if I don't say this, if I don't specify that I am an ocean science photographer, videographer, science writer, if I just say I'm a photographer, then people will assume I'm a wedding photographer. I have nothing against wedding photographers, but that is not what I do. So I try to, concisely explain what I do. And then the next question, after people get an idea of what my job is really like, the next question is always, how did you get that job? How do you end up doing this type of work? And it's a long story. I graduated from college about 15 years ago, and I did not expect to do any of this type of work when I was in school. So I'm going to try to condense the past 15 years into the next 3 or 4 minutes. But I do think this is helpful for people to understand how winding some career paths can be. So I am from North Carolina. I went to UNC Chapel Hill and I majored in journalism. They have a really outstanding journalism program, journalism school there. I did photojournalism and multimedia. I had a minor in Spanish. I only took 2 science classes in college. So I am one of those science communicators that does not come from a science background. But I am really glad that I went through the journalism school program. I got a lot of phenomenal experience doing international documentary work, working in both Mexico and Ecuador, and learning some really good technical camera skill sets that made me, very marketable later. However, when I graduated from college in 2010, I did not have a job lined up. And even though I went to a really good school and had a really good degree and really good professional experience, I didn't have the dream job when I graduated from college. And I speak to a lot of college students, and I think that that is a really important point to make. If you're a student and you're worried about getting a job, if you're the parent of a high school or college student and dealing with your child's anxiety, it happens. You get a degree, you don't always get the perfect dream job. I have a really fulfilling, amazing career now, but it took a little while to get to this point. So I just try to remind people of that dream jobs don't just fall out of the sky, we create them. So when I graduated, I had to just do part-time jobs and internships for about 6 months. I finally did get a full-time position at UNC, where I had just graduated from, working for UNC Research. And kind of similar to OSU here, our research office covered several different centers and institutes, working with researchers all over campus. So my job was to go around campus, go to different departments, different researchers, do some filming and photography and interviewing with them about their research, about their backgrounds, different spotlights. So it was a really cool job. I got to meet a lot of people and learn about a lot of science. I also got to travel to the coast. So basically the UNC Chapel Hill equivalent of the Hatfield facility here, we have an Institute of Marine Sciences on the coast of North Carolina. So this is directly behind the Institute at Sunrise. And I ended up going down here as often as I could. Once I figured out that work would pay me to go to the beach, I wanted to come down here all the time. And it really was just incredibly visual, working with researchers in the marsh, working on our little 60-foot research vessel and doing things like shark surveys, catch and release shark surveys, being able to get in the water with fish and sea turtles. This is releasing a rehabilitated sea turtle that had been cold stunned. Just doing all kinds of really adventurous, really fun work with marine scientists. I also got certified to scuba dive during this time, really just working on boats with marine scientists. And they said, Marley, you ought to get certified to scuba dive so you can photograph us doing this stuff underwater. And I actually got my office to pay for my scuba diving certification. So that was great. And then that opened up even more doors. I got to travel with UNC researchers down to Belize to do some coral reef conservation work down there. I went back to the Galapagos Islands to work with researchers there and utilize my new underwater photography skills there. So this all happened over a period of a couple of years. And as I did more and more marine science and ocean story work, researchers outside of UNC started to notice my work. So everything I had done up until this point was as a full-time university employee, promoting UNC research. But a group of researchers from Duke University approached me and said, hey, we've seen your work. We're really impressed with what you do. And we are leading an expedition to Antarctica. Would you like to come with us and document our expedition in Antarctica? Well, that was a pretty incredible once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The problem was it came with a catch. In order to join this expedition in Antarctica, I would have to leave my full-time job. I could not take 2 months off of work to go do something that was completely outside of UNC research. So I had to make a decision. Do I, leave the security and comfort of a full-time job in order to do this one big adventure, or do I turn down Antarctica? And I wasn't going to say no to Antarctica. So I said yes. I quit my job. I officially became a full-time freelancer, and I went to Antarctica, spent 6 weeks living and working on the Gould, working with a team studying humpback whales and minke whales. I could give a whole other presentation on Antarctica, but this was a pretty, life-changing experience to not just go to Antarctica, but to also leave my job and to start a new career as a full-time freelance science communicator. But I learned a lot just in that first expedition, that I like working on ships. I can handle being in extreme environments. I like the camaraderie and the challenges and all of the things that come with expedition work. And so this has become my specialty. And in the past 7 years, I have joined 25 different ocean research expeditions, and I've worked on 8 different vessels. And I absolutely love it. It is incredibly fun and fulfilling, and it teaches me something new all the time. So that's my background, kind of where I'm coming from and what my experience has been. And then the rest of this presentation will be kind of the nuts and bolts of how and why and what my approach to good science communication is. So I think it starts out with just the simple question of where are we, and the importance of establishing a sense of place when we are introducing a research project. And this can take a lot of different forms and look different depending on where you are and what tools you have. So, for example, this is a really beautiful drone shot that I was able to capture off the coast of Maui when we were working there in 2022. We were close to shore, we had good weather, and we had a drone on board, so I was able to capture this kind of image to show our location. That's not always possible, so there are a lot of other creative ways you can kind of show a sense of place. I really love photographing nautical charts. I just think they're really beautiful, intricate details. So this is one from Pongo Pongo Harbor when we were coming out of American Samoa just a few months ago. And then you can get creative with it. I always try to get good photos when we're sailing out of port. This is going out of San Juan, Puerto Rico for the Alvin expedition in 2022, doing a cool little framing there. And, for the chief scientist or some of the folks on the team, photos like this may not seem very important. But for other members of the team, photos like this can be incredibly important. Like for a member of our science team, Rosa Leon Zayas was the very first Puerto Rican to dive in Alvin and to do it in the Puerto Rico Trench. So for Rosa and for all the presentations she gives about that expedition, it is incredibly important to be able to show the connection to her native island of Puerto Rico. And I think that's a good reminder that when we're talking about the location of our research, it's not just coordinates on a map, it is connecting with local people, and having that representation matters. So I try to keep that in mind when we're talking about where we're doing research, is this is potentially somebody's home, and how can we connect our science to that. So that's a little bit of the where. And then, of course, as scientists, we're very used to hearing, why are you doing this? Why are you putting all this effort into getting this particular type of data, or, doing this project? And I think for scientists, it is very easy to get bogged down in the details and the data collection and the logistics. And it's sometimes easy to lose sight of the sense of wonder and awe that comes with making new discoveries. So a big priority for me when I'm working with science teams is to capture that sense of awe, that sense of wonder, because the science we do really is pretty incredible. So just a few examples. This is an Atolla jellyfish. This was working with the Ocean Twilight Zone project with Woods Hole in the North Atlantic. And I've actually done a couple Ocean Twilight Zone projects. So I've done 3 or 4 expeditions with Mesobot now. And Mesobot does some pretty incredible things, and it's been really cool to see it evolve over a couple of years. So during an expedition aboard Nautilus last fall, we were able to get some new cameras on Mesobot, and the footage that Mesobot captured during this particular expedition was just far beyond anything it had gathered before. It was better quality and had more animals than we'd ever seen with this tool before. So this is Eric Hayden. He's an engineer at Hui. I took this photo at like 1 in the morning, and he was just so stoked. I've sailed with him multiple times. I've never seen him more excited than he was when he was reviewing this footage. So I did this a couple different ways. I took photos of capturing this moment and showing the excitement on his face. I also wrote a blog post for Woods Hole to give a little more background and context to how and why this moment was really important and special as far as the history of Mesobot. And then we paired that with the actual video footage that Eric had been reviewing. So it's a little hard to see, it's a black background, but these are just some of the animals that we were seeing in this footage, all kinds of krill and salp chains and just, stuff that looks like it's from outer space. But these are just a few of the things that live in the mysterious ocean twilight zone. And so again, having that kind of, triple threat of media, having photos, video, and writing to show how, special and exciting this moment in the expedition was really, really effective. That's a great example of kind of deep sea excitement. I think it's also possible to capture wonder and awe and discovery just working in a lab. This happens to be a lab aboard EV Nautilus, but I think you can have these moments in a lab like here at Hatfield. And I think you can also capture these sorts of things just in your own backyard. You don't necessarily have to be in the middle of the ocean. So these next few photos are from Sitka, Alaska, working with the Sitka Sound Science Center up there. And this is just one of their semi-annual events where they bring a kindergarten class out to the coast and have them going through tide pools and making little discoveries of their own, just a really great community engagement event. But again, it doesn't have to be a tenure track chief scientist. It can be a 6-year-old kid. Being able to show that sense of wonder and discovery is just really important for reminding us why science is so special. And then the how, I think, is an important question too. How we do science, and especially how we do science in very challenging environments like the open ocean, is a really important thing to show as well. And in my opinion, I think it's really important to show how difficult this work can be and to show that you and your team are able to persevere through challenges and, deal with really tough environments and situations. So these are some of the dramatic photos, like dodging the outer bands of a hurricane in the Pacific. This was off the coast of Mexico in 2018 on the original RV Falcor. And this, again, just one of those classic dramatic at-sea images, got circulated all over the place. And even when weather is not super rough and conditions aren't really challenging like this, you can still have what I call a dynamic work environment when you're on a ship at sea. So this is a clip I shot with my drone. I want y'all to look at the ship in the background. We're on a Spanish research vessel in the North Atlantic in this front ship. The ship in the background is a British research vessel that's not moving because we're in perfectly calm seas. But you'll notice how much our ship is rocking, even though we're in perfectly calm seas. So again, this is a challenging, dynamic environment. This is the most unstable research vessel I've ever worked on. I don't recommend it. You know, it's not necessarily about the weather or the conditions. It can simply be the platform you're on is sometimes moving so much that it makes working challenging. But we still got a lot done during that expedition, even though we had really bad weather and the tippiest ship in the world. So it just shows how great our science team was. And then I really love getting up in people's faces if they're comfortable with me and they know me, and really showing the grit and determination and perseverance of some of the folks on our team. So this is Jessica Sandoval. She's a very talented engineer and ROV pilot working on ROV Hercules aboard Nautilus. And I just love, you can see just how hard she is literally working and sweating and getting this new instrument attached to the ROV. I think this type of photo is important for a lot of reasons. Science is hard work. Science takes a lot of perseverance and determination. Women in STEM, women working on ships, showing that representation. Just a lot of things are captured in just one single image like this photo. So very important to show this sort of stuff. And then just another really dynamic, dramatic image. This is from the North Atlantic, working with Jeff Pietro from Hui. He's in charge of their moorings operations. So we were pulling giant moorings that had been on the seafloor for over a year. It was very hard work. It took all day. It took much, much longer than we anticipated to get these things off the seafloor and onto the deck of the ship. And I think you can see that reflected in the expression on his face here, that, wow, this was more than we thought it was going to be. So being able to just, again, capture these challenges and show that we can do hard things in this type of science is just really important. And then another question that is critical to answer and can also be fun to answer is, what is it really like? What is it really like to live and work in the middle of the ocean on a research vessel? And I try to include some of this in every presentation I give, a little behind the scenes to kind of peel back the curtain and show people, you know, elements of life at sea that they might not see in more formal settings. So one question I get every single time I present about my work is, what do you eat when you're at sea? People have a hard time envisioning that we have a full industrial galley and we have people working very, very hard to feed us throughout the expedition, and that the galley crew has arguably the most important job on the ship. Science cannot happen if the scientists are not fed. So I always make it a point to photograph and give a lot of gratitude and appreciation to the galley crew. I also always get asked about fishing and whether or not we catch fish when we're out at sea. And the answer is, if we're not in a marine protected area, then yes, we do occasionally go fishing. This was off the coast of Hawaii. This is Mike Burns, our deck chief on Nautilus. He caught this giant, beautiful mahi. He chopped it up, filleted it, and we had it for dinner that night, and it was amazing. And, you know, a photo like this may just seem like kind of fun behind the scenes, but a photo like this could also be compelling and really effective for connecting with different types of audiences, which I'll talk more about in a minute. But let's say you want to connect with some local fishermen in your community and they think that your science has nothing to do with what they do. You show them a picture like this, that might get a conversation started. So again, just creating connections and helping people to see your science and your science operations in a different way. And then just more details that I think are interesting for folks. A lot of people don't know, if they haven't been to sea, that when we come into port, we raise the flag of whichever nation we are coming into port in. So we keep all of these different flags on board the ship, depending on which port we'll be going to. So this is actually pulling the flag down when we were sailing out of American Samoa. But just, little details like this can help people feel like they have an insider look at what it's really like. Another detail, this is just my favorite bumper sticker on Atlantis. It inspired a blog post that I wrote recently about hard work and tenacity and the types of people that you meet working on research vessels, solving problems. I also think it's really important to show the folks who don't always get the glory and the spotlight. So, the chief scientist and the science team get all the photos and all the glory from their research. But the guys in the engine room are equally important. So this is Tony Dodson, an oiler on Atlantis. And when I took this photo of him, I told him I wanted to take a nice environmental portrait in the engine room. And he was so excited. And he said, "No one has ever taken my photo before. Thank you." And that really struck me. And I've kept that in mind as I've worked on different ships, that everyone deserves a little appreciation and recognition, because we can't do science if the engine of the ship doesn't run. And same with the folks in the kitchen and everywhere else. Every single team member is really important. And then I also think it's important to show different kind of some of the non-traditional roles that exist on research vessels now. So my job is one of them, being the photographer. And then we sometimes have artists at sea. So this is Karen Romano Young, who some of you may know. She's a very talented artist and scientific illustrator. And we had the opportunity to sail together on the 2022 Alvin expedition. So Karen made this lovely illustration of me with my big hair and my big camera. And then I took this nice portrait of Karen, and it was just kind of a fun way for the artists to make art of each other. But an image like this could also be really valuable if you're writing a grant and your National Science Foundation grant includes a broader impacts outreach component, being able to show that you have folks who can create art and more creative products from your research. That's just yet another valuable thing. And when it comes to behind the scenes stuff, I also just can't resist showing the really nerdy scientist. So this is Jeff Beeson, who's not here today. So he gets to be poked fun at for just being a giant nerd. This was us goofing around at the end of our expedition at Axial this summer. But it's always fun just to make people feel a little silly. And I'll show a little more nerdy science stuff in just a minute as well. And one of the final questions is, who cares? And this goes back to one of the fundamental questions of, why are we doing this? Who cares? And this is a really important question to answer when you're thinking about science communication. And I think it's especially important to consider your different audiences. So who is going to see what type of content you're putting out there? And I'm going to show three different clips from videos I've produced to kind of illustrate this point. They all feature Bill, since Bill's the one who invited me to talk today. He gets to be the star of the show at the end here. So the first video I'm going to show is, it's just 60 seconds from a video we put together for a textbook chapter that Bill had just written. So we'll show this one first.
We're on a ship. We're on a research expedition out to Axial Seamount, an active submarine volcano on the Juan de Fuca spreading ridge. We just got here. Let's go check it out. Let's see what it looks like. Oh yeah, we can't just see it like a volcano on land. There's all this water in the way. So how do we study submarine volcanoes? Since we can't see them from the surface, we need specialized technologies to map the seafloor. Here we're going to look at 4 ways of doing that at different scales and resolutions. Where we have no other information, we can use radar data from satellites to make a rough estimate of the bathymetry of the underlying seafloor. From this we can see the locations of volcanic seamounts and mid-ocean ridges. This gives us a global coverage, but only at a very coarse resolution, producing a map with about 1 kilometer sized pixels.
So obviously that video starts out with Bill's very quirky personality, which adds a lot of life and interest to it. And I think it's great because the rest of that video is, textbook, right? This is just information that we need to make very clear and accurate and easy to digest for students who are learning this material for the first time. So that was a pretty, targeted audience video. I think it was great for Bill to be funny at the beginning, try to engage the students a little bit, but then the rest of it is, a little more dry, a little more just informational than other videos might be. So this next video clip I'm going to show is from the same expedition, also featuring Bill, but is a little more of a broad audience. This is just the expedition overview video. So this lives on the Woods Hole YouTube channel and has been shown in a lot of different places to a lot of different audiences. And you'll see immediately the tone and the language is different. It's more of a narrative, it's more of a story, it's broader. So we'll watch a little clip from this.
It's sort of like being a detective, because you get clues, you're trying to figure out what they mean, and then you collect more evidence and you build a story about what you think is going on. So I just find that really fun. We're out at Axial Seamount, which is about 300 miles west of the coast of Oregon, offshore, and it's an active submarine volcano on the Juan de Fuca Ridge.
Axial Seamount is one of the most highly studied volcanoes on Earth. Over the last several decades, there has been people doing research in all areas, from hydrothermal vents to the seismicity to what we do, which is measure the deformation of the volcano surface.
It's the most active volcano in the Pacific Northwest, but it might be one you haven't heard of or knew existed because it's about a mile underwater and about 300 miles offshore. But it's had 3 eruptions in the last 30 years.
1998, 2011, 2015. We think it is likely to erupt sometime in the next several years.
So again, the video goes on, but that gives you kind of a taste of what that, again, tone, language, visuals, this could appeal to a lot of different types of people, whether it's, students, colleagues, people who are just generally interested in volcanism, submarine volcanism. So that type of video is what I really specialize in, is, these expedition overviews. How do we tell the story of the research that we're doing at sea? But then it's also fun and valuable to make a blooper reel from all the interviews that I've shot with our scientists. And so this is our legendary blooper reel from this axial expedition.
First of all, volcanoes are just amazing things.
For starters, volcanoes are great.
Volcanoes are great.
It's like the Earth, being incredible.
It doesn't get old. It just doesn't get old. I made that while we were still at sea. I think our science team watched that blooper reel like 20 times while we were on the ship. It was just great for boosting morale. But a silly blooper reel video like this can actually be used in a lot of different contexts. Let's say you're giving a presentation to some high school students, trying to get them excited about earth science or volcanology. If you show them something like this and get the kids laughing, then that will, just make them that much more engaged, able to maybe see themselves as scientists. And I think that's another really important thing with, a silly video like this, is showing that science is not just, data and serious papers and all of this. Scientists are real people and are relatable. Scientists don't just live in an ivory tower, clocking in their numbers. I think showing that scientists are imperfect, are fallible, are funny, are silly, that is a really important part of this as well. So I hope that all of these examples I've shown will help to answer this final question. Why should we prioritize science communication? Why should we invest energy and time and resources into telling stories and producing content about your research? And I mean, to put it really simply, I would just say that the stories about your research and the stories about your science matter. And now, more than ever, it is incredibly important for us to make your science and research relatable and accessible and meaningful to people who are not scientists. Because the reality is, most of the world does not have a PhD and does not understand the intricacies of your data collection, but they will understand and appreciate your stories. So I hope y'all will prioritize that and keep that in mind. And thank you all so much for having me and for listening. And I would love to answer any questions if y'all have them. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate that. We're going to go to questions and we're going to bounce back and forth to folks online and folks in the room. So looks like maybe no questions yet online. So for folks that are listening in, put your questions into the chat and we'll get those asked. Anybody in the room? Go ahead and raise your hand. Yeah, well, give me a sec.
Thank you so much for a really interesting and just really entertaining presentation. When we go out to do field work, I mean, we have to make plans for everything, whether it's just what gear to bring or field safety and float plans and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, I've never actually made a plan about, what kinds of photos or images or stories I want to tell in addition to just the research. So I guess how much planning do you do ahead of time in terms of a specific shot you want to get? Or do you just enjoy doing it, the spontaneity of an expedition, wanting to capture that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And certainly a little bit of both. It's great to make plans, but anybody who's done field work or expedition work knows that plans can go out the window depending on a whole host of different factors. Weather conditions, equipment breaking. I mean, on this expedition with Bill, we had a perfect plan of we're going to make this textbook video, we're going to make this overview video, we're going to go out to sea for 12, 14 days, whatever it was. Well, we had to go back into port because our ROV winch was not working. So we had to seriously compress our timeline for science. And I was not even sure I would be able to produce a decent video, much less 2 videos from this expedition. So yeah, Bill and I had a plan and eventually we were able to pull it off, fortunately. But, I think to answer your question, it's have a plan, certainly have, shots and priorities of what content you really want to capture in mind, but also recognize that things can go sideways very quickly, especially when you're working in the middle of the ocean. So being flexible and adaptable and able to, shift how you do things is a really important part of the work too.
All right, question online.
On social media, it's often those funny, memeish, or blooper moments that go viral. How do you balance this with hard facts as a science communicator?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really great question. I don't have the perfect answer to it. I think it is, if you can draw people in with some of those funnier moments, with some of those lighter, simpler things, and then once you've got their attention, share some of the more, dense scientific information that you want to put out, which is much easier to do in a presentation like this. Social media is an ever evolving beast that we're all trying to navigate and figure out what's most effective. And I mean, I think that person's comment is correct that the silly blooper reel is going to get a lot more likes and probably more engagement than a graph showing your data. So yeah, trying to balance that is something we're always trying to figure out. I mean, I don't have a perfect answer to it. It's an ever evolving thing. And I mean, I have some cool stuff on social media, but I do not consider myself to be a social media guru or expert. I'm already too old for that, apparently. So, yeah, that's for people younger than me to figure out how we balance, but really important question.
All right, question in the room.
Thank you for the presentation. It's really great. My question is about when you're going out on these expeditions, and part of getting these really great like portrait shots comes from establishing a relationship with people on board. Do you have like a pre-brief that you give to the crew? Like, hey, this is who I am. This is what I'm going to be doing while I'm on the ship, or are people already aware of what your role is? How do you navigate that aspect of it?
Yeah, that's a really great question and a really important point. If you just show up and start shoving a camera in someone's face, that's really not gonna usually work out very well. So fortunately, the vessels that I work on most regularly are pretty used to having photographers and videographers. I think in recent years, it's become just more and more regular and accepted for there to be somebody on board documenting what's going on. So people aren't totally weirded out by the fact that someone's taking pictures, but even so, if they don't know me, if they've never met me, I do make it a point to introduce myself. And I'll say, do you mind if I take some photos? And, we live in this very image-rich, social media-driven society where it seems like everything is documented all the time. The reality is some people are not comfortable having their photo taken. Some people really don't want to be in front of a camera. And if that's the case, I fully respect that. If somebody tells me that they don't want to be photographed or filmed, then that's fine. I've got 24 other people who are happy to be on camera. So yeah, I respect people's space and privacy. If they don't want to be in front of my camera, I can work around that. That's perfectly fine. And yeah, I don't have an official brief that I give. There's usually just not time for that. We might have a quick all hands meeting at the start of an expedition. And I say, I'm Marley, I'm the photographer. You'll see me with a camera. If you don't want to be photographed, let me know. And that's about it, But I do spend a lot of time talking to folks when I'm working at sea and getting to know them. And, anybody who's worked on a research vessel knows you spend all your time together at every meal and, every waking hour of the day, you're around people. So you get to know people really quickly. And as soon as people start to feel comfortable with me, that's when I kind of get close and I say, okay, I'm going to take this like ridiculous close-up shot of you. I promise it's going to look cool. Like, just trust me. And then they're like, wow, Marley, that's an amazing photo. So then that keeps happening. And I've had a lot of really positive experiences with people complimenting my photography and saying, wow, you got better photos of me than I've ever seen, or I've never had this, type of photo taken before, and that sort of stuff. So it is really important to make people feel comfortable. And then I think the other really critical thing is I always share my photos with everyone that I've photographed. So making sure that I'm not just taking, but I'm also giving my photography to everyone. Yeah, that's how I try to do that.
Thank you. Roseanne, go ahead.
Thank you for your talk. You're super inspiring. I'm curious how you convince funders of the importance of documentation. In writing PhD funding materials, I'm concerned people review my material won't rank that topic as highly as novel science.
Sure. Depends on who the funders are. National Science Foundation and other big organizations are getting more and more supportive of outreach, broader impacts, education. All of these are just broad terms that my job falls under. So I would encourage everyone to apply for grants that include some sort of outreach component. But if they don't, if you're starting from scratch and writing your own grant and trying to make that a portion of it, email me, call me. I will help you with coming up with some really compelling language and some facts and figures that can justify how and why you need this as part of your grant, and how and why you need to be able to share your science with a broader audience, with local communities, community engagement. I mean, there's so many things and ways to phrase these things to funders that will make them think, oh, not only is that a good idea, we should maybe, have more of that. So that's part of what I do as well. I take all these cool photos and produce videos and stuff. I also help people with writing grants and with finding the right language to convince people that, yeah, this is important and this deserves some funding and support.
Great. Other questions in the room? 1 second. Thank you for meeting me, Parkway.
Get your steps in.
Hello. You kind of mentioned that expeditions are like 12 to 14 days long, but I was curious, like, what your normal day-to-day is like. You doing 8-hour, 20-hour days? I guess more of a day-to-day information, if you could give that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, actually, a lot of the expeditions I do are around a month long. The expedition with Bill this summer was one of the shorter ones I've done. So I'm usually at sea for about 3 or 4 weeks. And yeah, day-to-day life on a ship is very full. My days usually start very early. I'm usually up around sunrise, if not before. It depends on which ship I'm working on, but let's just say I'm working on a ship like Atlantis, like this summer with Bill. Up pretty early each day. I love to get photos when the light's changing. The sunrise can often be a great time to take photos. And then it's really a mix of, depending on what operations are happening when. If there's an ROV being deployed off the back deck, then I'm going to be on deck for that with all my safety gear and my camera. And honestly, if I'm not shooting, then I'm uploading photos, I'm recharging my camera batteries, I'm editing stuff. It's kind of around the clock operation for me to, especially like it was this summer working with Bill. We had just a couple of days to get all the footage, all the interviews recorded, to get everything edited and produced. I did that in a really, really tight time frame this summer. So yeah, very long days. But if I'm not actively out with my camera, recording an interview with one of the scientists or filming on deck or taking some photos, then I'm eating or sleeping or at the gym. I don't really have downtime. Some people are like, yeah, I watch movies when we're at sea. I don't really ever have time for that. And if there is downtime, I use that just to get to know people better, sit in the mess and have some coffee and talk with someone for half an hour about what their life is like and what they do when they're not at sea. I mean, it's just such a phenomenal opportunity to meet really, really cool, adventurous people. And I love having time to connect with my shipmates. So yeah, if I'm not working, I'm socializing, and I'm very much an extrovert, so that works out pretty well for me. Being around people 24/7 on a ship can be a lot for some folks, but I really enjoy it.
Great. Other questions in the room? Right. I'll come your way.
Hi, Marley. I'm curious about what your future plans are and what you want to do with your work.
That's a great question. Thank you. I definitely want to keep doing expedition work. I love it. But like I was chatting with Bill about today earlier, it's for somebody like me who is a full-time freelancer. I do not have a regular salary or benefits or anything that comes with having an institutional job. So it's really important for me to diversify the types of things I do. And what I've been getting into doing more and more recently is actually teaching. So I just led a photography and science communication workshop for young professionals in Palau 2 weeks ago. And that was through some National Geographic funding and with my colleagues at the Ocean Exploration Trust. But it was an incredibly beautiful, affirming, and really just fulfilling experience to go and work with folks in a very remote part of the world and to empower them with some of the skills and experiences that I have. And just, sharing that with more people. Especially when I talk to college students and young people, they're like, man, Marley, you have the coolest job. I want to do what you do. And I'm like, all right, let's have a workshop. Let's, let me pull out my camera. I can show you some stuff, like it's not impossible. Do you want to set up a website? I can help you put together a portfolio. So doing more mentoring and more teaching in addition to the expedition work I do is a big priority of mine. And it also works out pretty well because a lot of my field work and expedition work is seasonal. I'm very busy like spring, summer, fall, and then January, February, March, I have no expeditions scheduled. I'm not traveling. So yeah, those are times when I try to focus more on mentoring and teaching opportunities.
Have any cruises that you're looking forward to going on? Sorry. Do you have any cruises that you're looking forward to like in the near future?
Yeah. So I'm going to go back home to North Carolina for 10 days, and then I'm flying back out to Palau to do the final Nautilus expedition of the season around Palau. So that's my next official expedition. I'm really hopeful that when Axial erupts again, I'll get to go out with Bill again. That would be awesome. I really enjoyed that. I really would like to work on Atlantis again. I'm also, there's so many things I want to do. I really want to work in Alaska. I really want to work on the Sikuliak. If anybody knows anybody working with researchers on that ship, that's one I've really been wanting to get on. So yeah, doing any sort of work in the Arctic. There's a bunch of stuff I want to do. But I'm also a freelancer, so if somebody says, hey, we're going to the South Pacific, I'm like, all right, cool, let's go. Like I'll go anywhere. So yeah, always looking for more opportunities. And I don't know what my expedition season will be like for next year yet. That's part of the roller coaster of my job, is not knowing what's coming next, but I'm sure some cool stuff will happen.
Wonderful. I think we're going to wrap up there. And if folks have additional questions, we have contact information up on the screen, so you can reach out directly. If you didn't get enough of Bill today, remember next week, Bill is giving his seminar, so we can try to get a blooper reel from that event as well. That would be very fun. But again, can we just give a thank you to our speaker today? All right, everybody. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week.
Thank you. And I'll hang out for a few minutes if anybody wants to chat or ask more questions. Thanks, y'all.